This is, I think, our first esports invitational. I don't know. Um, so Dan graduated from Newhouse, the grad program TRF in the sports track this past May. And over the summer did some really cool things for esports and global social media content creation. So he's here to talk to you about that. And I am very esports novice. So every term I know, I think Dan has taught me. So this is all I know, this presentation. Go for it, Dan.
Okay. All right, Professor Holmes, thank you for the amazing introduction. Again, guys, hi, I'm Dan Liscum. I am a recent Syracuse grad, and today I'll be talking to you guys about breaking into esports and my time doing content creation for Genji Esports. So I have a little table of contents just to kind of give you guys an idea of what topics to expect going on right here for those that are interested, but I'll be going through each of these, obviously. So I'm Dan. My official title is social media videographer and editor for Genji Esports. I was a Syracuse University graduate in the grad program at Newhouse in 2025. I concentrated on sports media communication, but my emphasis was on esports, obviously. Um, a little bit about my background. I'm a huge esports fan. I've been playing video games since I was 3 years old on the Super Nintendo and kind of just fostered that love for gaming and competition as I grew up. I became really invested in the esports during 2018 with the conception of the Overwatch League, where I was a massive fan of the Genji's conglomerate, the Soul Dynasty, and kind of just kept that passion going, expanded to different esports title, and landed in my position later on, kind of going full circle, coming back to Genji. A little bit more about me is that I was a ex-collegiate esports athlete. I competed at my undergraduate at St. John Fisher University, where I was on the Valorant team for 2 years. I was the in-game leader and also their flex player. So yeah, had a lot of good memories from that, competing with a lot of my friends and kind of giving my competitive itch back after stopping playing in like high school. But outside of esports, by trade, I'm a video editor and motion graphics artist, along with content creator. I've been creating for as long as I can remember, and at Nua specifically, I focused on video editing and motion graphics, hence why I'm speaking here in post production. Position in Overwatch, I was a DPS player. Uh, my highest rating ever was on support, on where I was one tricking Ana, but that's that's kind of what I did. Um, so to begin, I wanted to lead out with what really esports is. By definition, is a multiplayer video game used as the basis for organized competition. So that is a very broad definition that kind of encompasses a lot of different things. So for example, on the screen, I have one of the Genji's many of their rosters, which is their Valorant team. So Valorant is an example of an esport. It is a Riot-owned title, FPS game, and that is where Genji's Valorant team competes. But there's a lot of different esports and they can look very, very differently. So another example is Minecraft. So Minecraft for me was an esport. I competed on this little server called Mineplex where I played for about 6 years and competed. And you wouldn't think Minecraft is like a competitive game, but where there is a will and some other people willing to compete, there is a way. So hence another esport. Um, so I wanted to see if anyone in the chat actually knows what the E in esports stands for. Feel free to Say it in the chat if you do know, if not.
Yes.
Yes, Henry.
Henry.
I think Augustine and Jason hit it right on the nail. It stands for electronic.
You would be right, and everyone else that said that, yeah, easy would be a way funnier one. But yes, it does stand for electronic sports, hence why it is performed over on like computers and virtually. So like I had previously mentioned, esports looks very, very, very different. So I've already talked about Valorant being a first-person shooter, but there's also other types of esports. So League of Legends is a MOBA game, better known as a massively online battle arena, and that is an example of like one of the largest esports titles. So there's MOBA games, there's first person shooters, and then there's some that go into kind of different categories. So like Rocket League is another example of an esport. And Rocket League is a 3v3 game mode where you're basically playing soccer, but instead of people, it is cars flying around and blowing them up, blowing each other up and scoring goals. It's a whole riot. But this is just kind of give you a sense of like what an esports org competes in and the different titles that go around. So as you might have been thinking with the pictures from the previous slide, those were examples of Gen.G's different rosters. You might be asking yourself, well, where are the women? And unfortunately, like many industries, this is a heavily male dominated industry. While women do represent over 46% of gamers overall, only 5% of them are represented in professional play. And that is shocking because gaming ability is not restricted by gender expression. As someone that competed in collegiate with several women on the roster, it has never came down to their ability to actually play. They are just as skilled as anyone else. And with esports, it usually does come down to how many hours have you logged into the game, and also, sorry, losing my train of thought. Not how many, it's how many hours you put into the game, but also, but not like inherently the ability of the person themselves. But the answer, I'm losing my train of thought completely. I'm sorry, guys. 1 second. So it's not because of their gender expression or identity, but rather basically just the community itself. The gaming community is very notorious for how toxic they really are, and the gaming community really has done itself no favors with like how inclusive they are to people from marginalized communities and also those of different expressions other than male and white. So the solution that at the highest levels that these titles have created, such as in the case for Riot Games, they created a separate circuit called Game Changers, which is essentially their separate form of competition, similar to like the WNBA, where you have women and non-binary expressing people competing at the highest levels. And the idea for this is not to separate them based on skill, but rather to give them the opportunity to truly compete without the fear of having like having hate and other external factors. So a great example of why it's not the skill involved, but rather just the opportunity is the Game Changers roster of the Shopify Rebellion. This is widely regarded as the most decorated team in Valorant's short history of 5 years. They have overwhelmingly dominated the Game Changer circuit. They've won every major title in the space within the last 4 to 5 years. So they've had performed at the top level and have shifted from just competing in Game Changers, but also competing in Valorant's tier 2 scene, which is called VCT Challengers in North America. Their stance within that is another question, but they do compete with the tier 1 and tier 2 prospects that go in North America. additionally to the Shopify rebellion, and like coincidentally, their star player Fluorescent, who was their duelist for a long time, transitioned from the Game Changer circuit and became the first Game Changers player to actually transition from tier one, well, from the Game Changer circuit to tier one play. So Fluorescent was acquired by a DCT EMEA team called Apex and became that first player to transition to tier one play from the Game Changer circuit, showcasing that skill is not what's lacking in the Game Changer circuit, but rather the opportunity. And Fluorescent dominated in her short stint with Apex, where she took a small absence after a mental health crisis. So goes to show you what the mental side does to you and why it's so important to have these other opportunities for these athletes. So I've talked a lot about Gen G, I've talked a lot about esports, but who really is Gen G? So established in 2017, Generation Gaming, better known as Gen G Esports, is a world-renowned South Korean-based esports organization with several championship-winning rosters. As of right now, they're located in 3 separate regions. First of which is Seoul, South Korea, which is where myself and also my roommate here, Henry, had the great opportunity to go and work at their headquarters in Seoul over the summer. But also they have operations in Los Angeles, California, where a bunch of my friends on their US team work. But also they do have a whole separate team that is based out of Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. So Gen G competes in a lot of different titles. We've talked about League of Legends, we've talked about Valorant, we talked about Rocket League, and then I briefly talked about the Overwatch League. For those who may not actually know, the Overwatch League did absolve in 2023 and was transitioned from that franchise model to the OWCS. And Gen G were one of 8 teams that were selected to be represented as partnership teams with Activision Blizzard, and now currently compete out of EMEA, better known as the Europe region. But this does not limit the amount of rosters that they have. They also compete in several titles like PUBG, PUBG Mobile, Brawl Stars, and even chess now, if you want to consider that an esport. Take a quick break. So who are the other players involved? I really think that it is important to emphasize that esports organizations do not function like a traditional sports team. The train is just going crazy, sorry. There's an organization can have multiple rosters that compete in different titles. So we talked about Gen G's different the different titles that they compete in. They have 8 professional rosters as it is right now listed on their website. And this does not include their global academy teams, which I will not go into depth about. They have a lot of really cool opportunities going on with their global academy, but that is a discussion for another day with like how deep that goes. So an organization might operate in one or more regions. So I was talking about how Gen G is a South Korean organization. So naturally they compete in Korea, but they also do have teams like I was talking about with the OWCS where they compete in EMEA, but they also have teams that compete in North America like their Rocket League team. But there's organizations that are not like Gen G where they only compete in one singular region. Sorry, I don't know what that's crazy. But some organizations choose to focus their resources into one one region themselves. So an example of this is the North American based organization of Sentinels, the hype train. Bill's game, yeah. I guess so. Just decides to do that right now. But the North American based organization of Sentinels primarily functions within North America. All their teams are based in North America and they function all of their resources within NA. So there are organizations that like are split between, or they can be in one singular region. So it is very, very important to note that esports organizations are not like traditional professional sports. So Gen G is not like the New York Giants. They're not like the Yankees, the Bills, any other team that you can think of. You want to think of these esports organizations more like stakeholder groups, or better yet, like a university's athletic department. They have multiple rosters that compete under the singular name, and these teams do not have players that overlap. So one player that is competing with League of Legends is not going to compete with their Valorant team, and vice versa. There might be opportunities for players to transition from one esport to another, but traditionally, when you're contracted, you're competing in one title. It's not like you are playing soccer in the fall and baseball in the spring. There's no overlap. So another poll example is Munchkin on Genji Valorant, plays for Genji Valorant. Will he also be playing with the League of Legends team? I'm just trying to make sure this is clear because it is very important to note. Yeah, looks yeah. So yeah, no. Munchkin will not be playing with the League of Legends team. So this is sort of also a trick question as well, because Munchkin used to compete with Genji's Overwatch team in the Seoul Dynasty, but he transitioned to Valorant. However, there's no intermixing. So when he was playing Overwatch, he was just playing Overwatch. Once he transitioned to Valorant, he was solely with their Valorant team, and he will not transition back and forth. So hopefully that clears up any confusion there might be. So now that we have the foundation laid out with how esports organizations kind of sort of function, what they are, and the different titles that are around, I wanted to talk about my experience within Gen G as a whole. So that started off with the Gen G Practicum Abroad. So the Practicum Abroad has a lot of different opportunities for people that are in higher education or want to actually just be a part of the esports space. So the Winter Practicum has 4 separate cohorts as it is right now, 2 of which are in the winter and the summer abroad cohorts. So this is an open invitation to university students across the world to be a part of the Genji Practicum Abroad. They also have the Recent Grads program. So those of you who may have graduated like me in May or are looking to graduate in this upcoming semester, there might be an opportunity for you to be a part of the Recent Grads cohort in the following year. So there's that cohort. That's another open invitation. But then there's also the Syracuse and University of Hawaii cohort, which is a separate cohort from these other opportunities, which are exclusive to universities that are partnered with Gen G. So how this looks was that for my specific cohort, there was 5 Syracuse University students and like 13 University of Hawaii students. So they it was just us together in those cohorts, and we were split amongst our different groups, and that's how we functioned. So there was 3 separate tracks for the practicum abroad. So first is the business cohort, which works focused on the business operations and the monetization part of esports within Gen G. There was also the education cohort, which was focused on their Gen G Global Academy activations and also curriculum building for certain activations that may or may not have been in Seoul. And then also the marketing cohort, which is the one that I was a part of. So our team was responsible with working with the in-house team in Korea and work on activations that were both in Seoul and globally. So each of these different cohorts were not cohorts. each of these different tracks were given individual projects to work towards. So like I had mentioned with their specific goals and activations, but they're also given some like side quests that they called where we had to, whether that was like making a TikTok video or finding archival footage for a documentary and collecting assets for it and doing like whatever they told us pretty much. But they also took us on these things called cultural immersion trips where we got to experience the various opportunities that are in Seoul, South Korea, and bring us up to speed to what makes Korea such a cultural hub for esports. And for anyone that is interested with the practicum abroad that is a student or not a student, please feel free to reach out to me and I can give you more details about this because it was an amazing opportunity. But I would also like to showcase a video by people that are much smarter than me and much better spoken that go a little bit more in depth about the practicum abroad and the opportunities that it gives.
My name is Dr. Joey Gariziak. I'm the Executive Director of Esports at Syracuse University. Super excited to be here at Genji in Seoul, Korea, to be part of what is a really awesome experience that Genji is putting on. These are the future workers that we'll have for the esports industry. And so being able to learn from the professionals at Genji and from the curriculum being developed, it's an invaluable experience that any student needs to take advantage of as much as possible to learn so much about video games, esports, the culture of Korea, the world market, and so much more beyond that. So really excited to be here and have students as part of this and to get back to Syracuse to tell other students about the great things they learned while part of this great program to send more students here in the future.
Sorry, just realized I was muting. Henry, thank you for the shout out and chat with that. It was a amazing opportunity being able to also live with some of the people that were a part of the cohort. So Henry and I both went to Syracuse and we didn't know each other going into it. And then we became close friends during our time in Korea. Henry was a part of the business cohort. I was a part of the marketing. And because we were able to live so closely together and being able to work on projects that were so intertwined with one another, having the different perspectives really helped like develop our strategies and like polish our work to be the best it could possibly be. But yeah, so the Genji Practicum Abroad was my internship. It was my internship, so I was fulfilling a 3-credit internship with Syracuse to complete my degree, and I just happened to get the opportunity to do it abroad, which I recommend to anyone. What is going on? Sorry. I recommend to anyone that is students currently to do that. So it was a internship. So the way I looked at the practicum was that you kind of make of it what you want of it. So I was a part of the marketing cohort where I had no interest of doing marketing. I'm a video production guy through and through. I like to create, I like to do video. I don't like to think too much about like the strategy. I just want to make some cool stuff. And thankfully my team was very talented and was very accommodating. So I was able to kind of make my experience exactly what I wanted of it. So I was able to create deliverables that were used in our final project, utilizing the skill set that I had acquired during my time in my undergrad and in my graduate work, and kind of make the experience what was going to look best on my portfolio and make most sense with my career going forward. So to be clear, that was a internship. And then I was approached in my final week in the practicum abroad to do a to continue my work with Genji via the Robo Games Academy and Esports World Cup. So I had a pretty like casual sit down lunch with the MENA partnerships lead at Genji, and we just kind of talked over lunch about this role and like what it would do. And she was asking me about my skill set, and she decided that I sound like a pretty good fit. So they took me on with their MENA team. So I was tasked with working with the Robo Games Academy, which was a partnership with Al Faisal University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So to continue with this, my official title was videographer and editor. My assignment was to create a marketing campaign, which was mostly video, to promote the PUBG Mobile section of the event. So I created all of the social media content that was on their LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for this campaign. It was a mix between the vertical and horizontal style content for each of these unique platforms. And as many of you might know, this has its unique set of circumstances depending on vertical or horizontal, and they operate very differently. So it was a challenge to like create strategy for two different styles. But I loved my time with during this, and it was a hybrid position. So I started while I was in Korea, did it for the last week, did it for that final week along with my final projects, and then I went back home to New York and continued my work for about a month, and then they flew me out to Saudi to do some on-site work with Robo Games Academy at Faisal University, and then also do some stuff for them behind the scenes at the Esports World Cup. So social media strategy looks pretty different abroad because the social channels differ so drastically. So there is some consistency, like you see in the esports space, the most used social media platforms for North America are X, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitch. However, this differs depending on the region. So in Korea, Twitch doesn't exist. Twitch is banned. So they have a streaming platform which is called SUP, well, SUP. It's it's weird. It was formerly known as Africa, and it's basically just Twitch, but they of course have to have something different. I don't know what the deal is, but they have SUP. And then in Saudi, they are stealing the name. And then in Saudi, they don't use TikTok nearly as much. I found it interesting during my work and research during my time with Genji that Snapchat is used so much by their Saudi audience, and I'm not sure why, but like after doing like R&D and talking with their interns and their MENA team, they were like Snapchat's huge, but the thing is they don't have a Snapchat platform. They don't have a Snapchat platform, so it was like, how can I create content that makes sense for their platforms that already exist without having to create something new? I also want to reiterate, I was not a social media manager. I was creating only the deliverables. So all the posting was people that have that layer of like expertise, was not me. But these were like the unique situations that I had to deal with working with Genji and doing R&D for this. Another thing you have to consider with global social media strategy is the language that you're using. So generally speaking, for Genji as a South Korean based organization, they have a very serious and professional tone. They do not like to tread into any like goofy silliness that you might see with like some like professional organizations within the States. Like there's some esports organizations that like to take a more like sarcastic tone that matches their audience better. But generally with Genji, they do not tread on that at all. They try to stay as serious and professional as possible. But in addition to this is their languages. So Genji separates their channels based on region. So their main account is Genji Esports, which is their English channel. It is their most followed platform across their several different accounts. But they also had Genji Korea, which is their Korean, like solely Korean based account. And then they have Genji Mina, which splits between English and Arabic speaking audiences. So Genji Esports does English with English subtitles, whether their players are speaking in whatever language it might be, Arabic, Korean, anything else. They would be in English primarily. The Korean division will have Korean subtitles, vice versa. Genji Mina splits between it. So during my experience, I had to work with an Arabic voiceover, not speaking a lick of Arabic, but having to make English subtitles for it. So it took a lot of communication with my with the interns on their Mina team and also their other members to coordinate accordingly to make sure everything was up to par. But yeah, so those were kind of like a couple of the struggles that I faced, but also just like some unique challenges that you see with social media when you're working globally that you won't account for when you're going into it. And I was just going to showcase a advertisement for SUP that was, I think Henry can vouch for me. This was showcased at every single billboard that you would go to in Seoul. When you were riding the subway, when you were walking downtown, anything you saw a billboard, this ad was popped up, and I think it showcases pretty well the tonal shift, well, not the tonal shift, but the cultural difference between the US and Korea. But yeah, I'll just showcase.
난 편집하지 않아. 그게 진짜 나니까. 새로운 도전과 색다른 재미, 함께하는 즐거움까지. 여기 숲에서 끝없이 스트리밍 중. 라이브 스트리밍을 넘어 라이프 스트리밍이 되다. 숲.
Okay, so for those who don't know, this is esports legend Faker. He is a part of an organization called T1. He is the equivalent of LeBron James, Michael Jordan. This is the guy of esports. This is Mr. Esports. And yeah, he is a League of Legends player. He plays mid lane. And yeah, so this guy, I think it's such a significant difference because I think it's hilarious that their main guys are basically just people who are aura farming. In this, if I want to use like a modern term, he's like mysterious, he's cool, and yeah, he's like the guy. And I think it just like showcases how different it can be when you're traveling abroad, but also showcasing SUP. And I think it's really cool that like there's like some subtle notes with like showcasing that it's more than just like gaming, but like the main thing is it's Faker, it's esports. So to continue, we're going to shift to the Esports World Cup. For those who aren't aware of what that is, it is an annual global esports event that competes over 25 different esports title in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. It is a 2-month tournament from July to August, where most of these tournaments are happening simultaneously. And this number is projected to go up with the number of titles. This is only the second year of operations for the Esports World Cup. But with that, I will say the tournament's structure is kind of weird. So the week that I was in Riyadh, I was there for the Valorant week. So the Valorant tournament was happening, and a lot of these pictures showcase me at the live arena supporting Genji, who came in 3rd place. They did very well in that tournament, but they also were competing in Apex Legends at the same exact time. and there's also Brawl Stars going on at the same time. So this is a massive venue that this is not a picture of the venue, but it kind of gives you a scale of like what's going on here. But it's a massive venue with a bunch of different esports events going on at the same time, and the is what they're hoping is going to become the Olympics for esports, rather than the clubs and organizations representing their respective countries. They're representing the different clubs. So like Genji, they just compete with a bunch of different titles. Yeah. So to continue, I wanted to talk about some of the skills that I found to be really helpful with me being successful in this space. So to begin, we have experience working in a fast-paced environment, which is something that both Syracuse and Ithaca does a great job with preparing students for, especially those who are studying within the film industry. It is a very, very fast-paced environment, and it prepares you for an environment like in esports where turnarounds are really fast. You will be at a tournament the day of, capturing footage or collecting assets, and then you'll come home at night, organize everything, edit it, and prepare a deliverable by 9 in the morning. You will have to be ready to do these turnarounds like you will in any other industry, but I feel is especially prevalent, especially within the esports and the traditional sports space. But I also like to say, like, know your limits, but dare also to try, because there was an experience where amongst my first task for Genji, I was, like I had mentioned, I was working on this deliverable in my final week, and I was set to fly out of Seoul and have a 25-hour travel day back to the States. However, I had a deadline that was which was the next day, and I had to coordinate with their entire MENA team and some of their Seoul team to try to get this asset together. And I was straight up with my supervisor. I was like, I really don't know how possible this is going to be. And she was like, you didn't even try it yet. And I'm like, you're totally right. So even though I was spending most of my time in flights, I was utilizing my time effectively with asset collections, conceptualization, strategy, and put together a deliverable that they liked, and just kept going off of that. So there's that. It's remaining flexible, which I kind of just like went into depth about. Like in esports, you need to prepare to be a part of very small teams. There's not a lot of people in their individual departments, so you have to wear a lot of different hats. So being flexible is a super important trait. Being able to receive criticism and give out constructive criticism is also a really big factor. These are skills that I was very thankful to have learned at Syracuse with the help of Professor Holmes's class, where I was able to take every piece of feedback that I got, be able to internalize it, and be able to construe it in a way that makes sense, especially when you're working with supervisors that don't necessarily have the same level of expertise as you might have. Like in my case with the MENA partnerships lead, she was a partnerships person. She didn't know video at all. So I had to be able to take her feedback, let her know what was possible, and also do it in a way that wasn't going to offend her or come off as condescending, There's also empathy. So when you're working in a global space, you might be working with people where English isn't their first language. They might not speak your language, or they haven't came from the same cultural background. You have to be able to read the room and act accordingly, and kind of just know when to give, when to take, if that makes sense. There's also the willingness to do the work that nobody else wants to. So as a lot of us here are in the post-production industry, everyone is kind of familiar with the idea of doing the night shift and doing things that you kind of don't want to do. So I was working with the Sol and Mina team where it was 13 hours and 7 hours ahead of me respectively. So I would have to take meetings at 2 in the morning to accommodate for the crazy schedule that was going on. The only time was then that worked for our whole team, so I just did it. And it was because of this flexibility, it was because of this willingness that they kept giving me more work. It was only one, like losing my train of thought. I was only assigned like a handful of videos originally, but because I was able to work efficiently and utilize the skills that I learned while in higher education, that expanded to about double in size because I was just able to put out more work than they were anticipating. And that kind of goes in hand with the proactivity and waiting to be told what to do, especially within like this esports space. In this esports space, you need to be able to anticipate the needs and provide options to your supervisors or to your team, just because everything is moving so fast. It's better being able to say like, I like this one more, here's where you can add to it, rather than just to have one version and you provide it to them and they're like, I hate this all, get rid of it. And it's like, so being able to anticipate that and providing those options are huge, but then also doing more than what's expected kind of goes hand in hand with that. So my final reflection here is that studying abroad, for those who haven't had the opportunity to do it, because it is truly a life-changing experience. Not only does it change your mindset towards the work that you're used to doing, in my case with video production, it was so different. Like the way that I was thought prior to going to Saudi and Seoul is so much different than it is right now. It also allows you to see how storytelling, like in the case with the SUP commercial, and also just like the social media strategy itself, allows you to see storytelling from a different perspective and lets you be a more diverse storyteller. It allows you to build lifelong friends, like in the case with me and my buddy Henry, and also just builds on your personal lore. I don't know how many people can really be like, oh, I went to Korea to go work with Genji Esports, and then they also took me back to go to Saudi Arabia. It's like these type of experiences where it's like I really got to go do that, and I can talk about it with not only just like in casual greetings, but also for like future work. So whether you're studying esports, film, business, marketing, whatever else, there's a place for you within the esports space and also just your respective space itself. So don't be afraid to push your boundaries and always remember Jeji fighting. So yeah, thank you guys for listening to me ramble about esports. And I am now I am willing to take some questions if anyone has anything.
He also has something after we stop the recording.
Yeah.
So questions now, and then we can have non-recorded stuff.
Daniel, I have a question for you.
Well, okay.
And I'm sorry if you said this before I got here because I got here a little late, but something I'm curious about is just like, how do the games that these players play arise? Like how do these teams slash players slash the culture, whatever forces are at play, like end up with certain games? And are there new games that are on the rise that these organizations are like, these would be good games for our players and for our fan base to be centering content around?
Yeah, Mike, that's a fantastic question because it is something that is super prevalent in today's age. So a great example of this was the recent hero shooter with Marvel Rivals. I'm sure many people here have heard of the title. It has become one of the most popular hero shooters in the genre as of the last year. And a lot of these organizations had a lot of skepticism of whether they wanted to enter the space altogether, because esports are kind of made or broken by the community that they're in. There's a lot of space. There's a lot of titles that start out. They like start out and like have their like short burst, and then they just completely burn out entirely. So at a business perspective, they have to look at it as what's the investment and like what's the like the cost related to it. So like for Genji, for they currently have a Rivals team. When we were in Seoul, they did not, and they went into depth about how they didn't know whether they wanted to enter the scene because they already have so many different rosters. Their League of Legends teams already cost them a good bit of money to keep them together because they're a championship winning roster that is that makes them a lot of money, but also costs a lot of money. So it's like you have to take into consideration, it's like, oh, how competitive can we actually be? Do we see an ecosystem where the community is actually going to stay around for longer than just like a year? And also how competitively feasible it is, like who operates it. So a good example right now is an unreleased game called Deadlock, where a lot of people are hailing this as going to be the next big esports title. There's a lot of universities that are starting to get teams. There's a lot of people competing, even though this game is in a closed beta still. And it ultimately just comes down to like whether the community stays alive or not. Valorant was a great example of a title that is relatively new. People didn't know whether it was going to be huge, but organizations chose to invest in it because entity like Riot Games, who made League of Legends, was able to operate it. So I think it just comes down to the organization and whether they want to take that bet or not. Yeah. Hayden, I saw you had your hand up too. Might kind of jump the gun.
Yeah, I did. Actually, it's good that you took that question because mine kind of piggybacks off that a little bit. I first of all know nothing about esports, so thank you. This was very informative. But the little that I do know has kind of referred to it as a bubble of sorts, especially considering that, I mean, as you sort of showed, a lot of the money coming into the industry is coming from very specific singular sources
Yep.
that historically have a lot of their own capital to invest in it. And I'm just kind of curious how you feel or what you think about that assessment of the industry, especially since, like, as you said, there's always looking for the next big esport, even though you said this at the like beginning of the presentation, like chess could
Yep.
be considered an esport as well.
Yep.
Like, so what's your read on that?
I totally agree with the whole bubble thing, and I think I'll go a little bit more as well once we finish the recording, but I'll go pretty light on it right now. There, like in the space, there has been a kind of bubble mentality for a while. Like the Overwatch League was a great example of like this bubble thing where Blizzard was asking organizations to cough up 50 million to buy into the Overwatch League initially, and organizations were like they were like promising a structure like the NFL, like it was going to be huge. We're going to have these local venues where everyone's going to be able to come and watch esports and like support these teams, and then it just blows up in their face, and then organizations that were like that stayed in them if they could were only given like $2 million like buyouts. And then you have like capitalist companies that will like invest into organizations such as like the Guard. This was an organization, it was an esports organization that was pretty competitive in a couple different titles. They were owned by the same capital investment group that owns like Arsenal and the Rams. And then they're just like, nah, I don't want to be in esports anymore. And then they just cut all funding. So it kind of feels like it is a bubble investment, but it comes down to also the organizations and what they're doing with their long-term like longevity. So a great example is an organization like Genji that doesn't necessarily solely rely on their teams to have financial success. They have recognized that esports is a pretty like relatively new industry, and they have other venues of which to create capital pretty much. So they have their global academy where they're fostering the next generation of gamers and esports professionals, where they see a little bit of revenue but also are creating lifelong fans. So they have like those initial funds, but they recognize that they need to do more than just like go out and win. So yeah, I also would love to talk on this more after. So I hope that's enough. Brendan, yeah.
Sorry, my computer just lagged a little bit.
You're good.
I know you mostly do work in like post-production, like editing and stuff. But I know you mentioned you were at the Esports World Cup. I was just wondering, like, did you work with people who were like on the production side of esports, and like what does that look like? Like what kind of roles do people do there at the tournaments, or just like producing the content?
Yeah, sure. I can I can say I do know a lot of people in production at Syracuse. I was going to do a shameless plug for their entire program over at Q's. They are doing a fantastic job on the production side, where they have a production coordinator by the name of Sean Kelly, who does a fantastic job at producing all of the games that go on with Syracuse esports. But a lot of the roles that you see in esports kind of do follow a very traditional sports like role system. So like you have your directors, you have your producers, your camera operators, you have in the back, you're gonna have everyone that's like operating from behind the scenes. I'm not the most familiar with production terms, but uh there is a massive opportunity with live production when it comes to esports. And I do want to mention that if you're in video work and you're looking for jobs in esports, live production is the way to go. Creative video is honestly really tough because they want you to do social media work. I studied film the entirety of my life. I wanted to make like anything from like promotional to skits, like stuff like that for esports organizations. But realistically, these organizations don't have the budgets or the departments to function right now in those spaces. So if you're looking for a role in esports, it's more on the live production side with like organizations like Riot, Activision Blizzard, or those other entities. Hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Because I have a pretty long-winded next slide.
Okay, before you get to the slide, I'm gonna say thank you, Dan. This was great. We all learned so much and can't wait for your tea second.